activism in Cambridge in the 70s and 80s, and since then has led workshops on women's liberation and leadership for women and ending sexism for both men and women. She's been running a support group for women for over 10 years. And Karl has facilitated groups of men over many years, looking at how men have been conditioned from very early in their lives to dominate each other and to dominate females, and slowly recovering from that conditioning. Okay. Okay, thanks.
So between us, we thought that I should go first.
He had my permission.
So how can men and women be allies to each other? So what is it we need to be allies about? You know, what are our struggles? So first of all, I think men and women have different struggles. And so first of all, I'll talk about sexism. So for the purposes of this talk, I'll define sexism as the systematic mistreatment of women and girls as a group and as individuals, with men and boys conditioned to be the primary agents of that mistreatment. And from my point of view, what it looks like to me when I look at women's lives and females' lives around me, what it looks like is that sexism is the idea that almost everything about women is less important and secondary to anything about men. And this is largely unquestioned. It's accepted as normal, obvious, and biological. And it includes the trivialization of everything female, including women's work, female culture, you know, what you like to do, and importantly, it includes the trivialization of sexism itself, as if it's not important. And so there have been real but limited advances in equality for women, but they've been taken to mean that sexism has ended, so that if you still have a struggle, they're seen as your personal failure. And further, these struggles are taken to be a confirmation of sexist ideas, rather than that sexism has been hard on women and girls and has held you back. And it seems to me that women have been discouraged from even talking about sexism, and I guess it may feel humiliating for you to show a struggle if everyone is acting as if there is nothing wrong. You know, why are you struggling when there's nothing wrong? And it also seems to be that the women that do try and highlight or challenge sexism are ridiculed and attacked. So that's kind of what I see when I look around. You know, I'm sure the struggles are much bigger than that, but you know, I've only got 5 minutes to talk. So that's a kind of outline of what I see that women's struggle is. And then I'll want to move on to what I see men's struggle being, or at least a 2.5 minute version of it. But first of all, I think I have to talk about generally about mistreatment. That mistreatment has a kind of contagious stickiness to it. So if you're mistreated as a child, or you even witness mistreatment growing up, and you don't get to recover from the emotional hurt of experiencing or witnessing it, then you become vulnerable to reenacting either end of it. So you become vulnerable to reenacting the victim role, being powerless, feeling small, and being passive, and you become vulnerable to reenacting the oppressor role, say, by hurting someone else. And that vulnerability seems to hang around until you recover from the emotional hurt of being mistreated or witnessing mistreatment. So having said that, I'll talk about what I see happening to boys, and it happened to me, and it's happened to a lot of men that I've talked to. It may not have happened to every single male. So the question that I've written down here is, what happens to boys that sets us up as men to become the primary agents of sexism? And there's a lot to say, so I can only give a summary. But as boys, any way we look different to what's been held up as normal or, you know, like a man, is attacked by other boys and men with humiliation and violence. And especially any sign of weakness is attacked. So eventually we're forced to pretend that nothing hurts us. You know, if we show that something hurts us, we get attacked even more, so we just have to keep it inside. And it leaves us feeling very small and vulnerable, but we can't talk about it because we'd be attacked for being weak. And so we end up lonely and scared and hiding our minds. And to make things worse, at a certain point, the threat of what I'd call gay oppression comes in, so that any sign that we might even like our male friends gets attacked as being gay. And for me, that happened as soon as I got to secondary school. you got to school and there was this new word. It doesn't really matter what it was, but it's a different word in every school. But you didn't know what that word meant, but you knew that if you got close to a male, then you got called that, and all the other males would kind of ridicule you or move away. And so we got even more lonely, even more scared. And in the middle of all that, we're offered the idea that at least we're better than girls. So we feel awful, but at least we're better than girls. And in the midst of having lost our ability to relate to people and be close, males and females by that point, we're told that we might find some kind of closeness in sex. And so we get very desperate around sex, or the idea of sex even. So the mistreatment that we get as boys, which mostly happens from other boys and men, combined with sexist ideas that are prevalent in our cultures, make us vulnerable as boys and men to reenacting how we were mistreated at females, at girls and women. But it doesn't really, it's not limited to girls and women. Whenever I'm trying to get a group of men together to look at all of this stuff, no one feels very comfortable in doing it. It's because we take that out ourselves. When we were young, it came at us from the boys around us, from the slightly older boys, from our fathers, from the male teachers. And any male feels a little scary. So we do it to each other. So, and that there's a cycle of young boys being mistreated, then going on to mistreat basically everyone around, whoever looks weak. And we could give that the name male domination. So that's the end of my bit.
Right. Okay, so if we're going to be allies in ending sexism and male domination, there are some challenges ahead for us. And identifying what these challenges are, they're going to be different for men and women, and I don't want to talk particularly about other challenges tonight, but I think if we look at the challenges facing men and women, we can also look at challenges at ending other forms of discrimination and oppression, which would be to do with the LGBTQ identities, to do with classism and racism and everything else. So I'm not kind of putting forward that sexism is the major kind of form of oppression in society, but if we can learn to get some things right there about being allies together there, we will get things better in all those other domains as well. So the challenges are different for us as men and women. And one of the things that I'd like us to think about tonight is like, well, how do we step out of this powerless role that we have, that Karl was talking about? Sometimes you're rendered the victim and rendered powerless and you can't do something about it. Because if I asked any of you here now, do you really understand what sexism is? How many of you would put your hands up?
Well,
Yes. Yeah, okay, creeping up. Okay, but some not down. The first challenge is to understand what it really is, and understand that intersectionality with all those other things that I mentioned. Because if I'm going to be a champion of women, I need to understand women who are completely different to me, And if as a man you're going to kind of be a champion of women, you need to be a champion of many different kinds of women to make it effective. And similarly, in that, you need to understand the different struggles of different men too, because they will come over differently in society. So I'm going to hark back to the 1970s now, when I first started being a feminist. And 1970 was a really important year for us because we actually had the Equal Pay Act. It's nearly 50 years ago. And did legislation work? Kind of a little bit, but not enough, So back in 2010, we have the Equality Act. And so the issues that weren't resolved in the Equal Pay Act are now being churned out yet again. But if we're going to really change things on a structural level, we need to understand that changing things on the personal level is going to be an important part of that. So when I was kind of looking through the internet, for instance, on recent work about men and women being allies, almost all of it was focused in the workplace. There was very little focused on interpersonal relationships in the home, things like that. And the solutions that they were putting forward were very much individually based, like don't be sexist towards that woman in the workplace. It didn't actually look at those larger institutionalized things like, well, how much time do men have off for paternity leave and things like that. And so there are struggles that men have, that men need to face together in order to be champions and allies for women. So it isn't about making things better for women that ending sexism and ending male domination means. It actually means men ending the domination of men in a particular way as well, so that we can all end up being much more fully human together with one another than having, seeing us as kind of opposites, that we're so biologically different that it means that we have very different aspirations, that we have a very different intelligence, that we have a very different kind of emotionality. The reality is that there's more that connects us as human beings than before. And if you look at the anthropological and archaeological kind of evidence now back to those kind of tribal times, before we had the establishment of agriculture and civilization, there was much, much more equality around. It's the start of organized civilization and agriculture that seems to kick off slavery, enslavement of people, and discrimination and oppression. But we've got a particular form to look at now, living under the capitalist society that we have today. So I hope we'll deal with that in the next section.
Okay, thanks, Karl. Thanks, Elena. So just a few moments to digest that a little bit before we get some more food for thought. So I'll just put you into the